Looks like we're live. Welcome everyone. We'll give everyone just a matter of moments to join the call. Any late stragglers, we'll welcome them into the room and just give a little pause and a little beat prior to starting out with introductions, both to Oracle as a business and our expert panel today. So we'll just give it a matter of moments and then we'll get going. Perfect. Well, thank you for joining us this afternoon and welcome to Oracle's Digital Health event. I'll start off by introducing myself. My name's Blair Walker and I work as part of the commercial team here at Oracle, sitting across sales and marketing in research and insights. And today we have a wonderful group of industry experts with us to speak about the technologies that are tied to the 4Ds of healthcare: data, diagnostics, digital, and devices. I'll give our guests a chance to introduce themselves in turn in a moment, but they cover a great range and represent a range of different innovative organizations within the health sector. You know, I'm sure that you will find the topics that we're going to speak about and the individual opinions very insightful. So just before we get started, I'll briefly introduce you to Oracle if you haven't heard of us before. We're a digital agency that's based all across the UK. We deliver innovative software development across mobile, web, and emerging technologies for our two focus verticals, which are digital health and financial services. We've got well over 200 staff now working across research, design, development, delivery, and optimization for some of the UK and Europe's biggest businesses, creating customer, patient, and healthcare professional experiences that aim to make life better. But that's really all you'll hear about us today, because we'll be handing over to our industry experts. You won't be hearing my sales pitch and you won't be deaf by PowerPoint, because today's conversation is going to be structured without slides, but we are going to have some guided questions to encourage conversation within our group. So I will be the arbitrator of timings over the next hour to try and keep the conversation moving and to try and make sure that we get the most out of the hour. If at any point you have a question that you would like to ask of any of the panelists, if you can use the Q&A function and pop them through to us, we'll aim to have around about 10 minutes at the end for those questions to be raised with our panelists. So now I think it's a great place to start if we could go around the table and let each of our panelists introduce themselves before we get started with the questions. If I could hand over to Hakim first, that'd be great.
Thank you, Blair, and good afternoon, everyone. So my name is Hakim. I'm one of the co-founders and CEO of Closed Loop Medicine. And what we know about patients and health systems trying to manage chronic disease is the need to be able to provide an integrated and holistic care solution for patients. And it's very difficult to do that in the current environment where you have different silos of the way in which we deliver therapy to patients. So what we're doing at Closed Loop Medicine is co-developing software as a medical device with known drugs to create a combination product that allows a patient to receive and a physician to prescribe an integrated product solution, providing the wellness, lifestyle, diet, exercise support alongside the drug as a single integrated package. And so this is a really exciting event to be talking with everyone today in terms of how these types of technologies are going to change healthcare and hopefully improve the lives of patients here in the UK, but further afield. So thank you, Blair, for the invitation.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. If we could hand over to David next.
Good afternoon, everybody, and it's wonderful to be here with you this afternoon. My name is David Pardo. I'm Head of Technology Development at an organisation called LifeArc, which you may not have heard of. We're a relatively small organisation, about 250 people, a charity under UK law, but we're also self-financing. So we don't go out and rattle tins. We exist on the benefits of the products which we have helped to develop in the past. One of those products is a product that Merck sells called Keytruda, and we've recently sold a revenue stream off the back of that because we helped to humanized that antibody, and we netted about $1.3 billion. Now, for a charity, that's an unusual situation to be in, and it allows us to rethink what it is that we do. And it allows us to think beyond the drugs and diagnostics that we traditionally have been involved in the translation of, into extending that translational advice and the translational funding to drive research innovation from across the globe into patient benefit. And of course, the point of this conversation today is around the drugs, the diagnostics, the devices, and the digital, perhaps the infrastructure, that provides the holistic solutions that patients are absolutely desperate to realize. So I'm looking forward to it. It's going to be a very interesting conversation this afternoon. Thanks, Blair.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, David, and welcome. I'll next pass it over to Alison.
Thank you, Blair. Hello, everyone. My name is Alison Morgan, and I'm the founder of Metis Clinical, which is a drug development consultancy, which was established in 2014. I work largely in the pre-registration space, although not exclusively so, and I undertake a lot of work in rare diseases, particularly at the clinical regulatory interface. It's being increasingly recognised that the patient voice is of prime importance in clinical drug development programmes, and not just around efficacy, but long-term effectiveness and their utility in the real world. And it's very important for us as an industry to try to understand the best way through the use of digital technologies to harness that voice and speak also with one voice, regulators, industry and patients, to provide greater access to novel compounds.
Wonderful, thank you, Alison. And lastly, Ken Fivey. I'll pass across to you, Ken.
Thank you, Blair, and good afternoon, everyone. It's very good to be here, and thank you for your time. My background is all life sciences. I've worked in the industry itself, and then as an analyst of it for several years, and then I consulted to it for 20-odd years through a major consulting firm, management and technology consulting. I retired from that about 2013, since when I have been participating in boards and board activities. I am chairman of 2 companies and on the boards of another 2. So the range of subjects that they focus on is very broad, all life sciences, of course, but data features prominently. So I have a big data company on whose board I sit, pharmaceutical development company, and a new diagnostic company, New Tech, spun out of Dundee just last year. In addition, a new gene therapy or gene delivery company that is also just a spin out. So I don't have any particular singular focus, but I cover a wide range of life science topics through my positions in various boards. And that was augmented just at the start of this year by being introduced to Oracle, with whom I am collaborating, just helping them to focus on the life sciences industry for their healthcare business.
Thank you so much. Yeah, and thank you all for joining us today. It's a real honour, and thanks for making me feel so inadequate about my own skill set. The first question that we have is a very broad one, and I suppose that we could go to each of you in turn to discuss it prior to moving forward into some more specific questions. So the first question to the group is, can you give an example where the adoption of a specific new technology has either improved your own business or impacted the business that you've been working for over the last year during this particularly difficult time during the pandemic? Who would like to go first?
I'll jump in that. And sorry, Ken.
Nope, go David.
I feel I might be adding a little bit of a limb here, and maybe away from the core of certainly much of this panel, because I'm going to talk about the use of the technology in the translational research space. And the one thing that's really hit us is the potential of virtual reality and augmented reality. So we're using virtual reality to explore enormously large and complex data sets, so genomics data, the human protein atlas, disease mechanisms. But doing that in 3-dimensional space, because the one thing that strikes me in the 30-something, I won't be precise here, years that I've been working, every time that I've interacted with data, I've done so on a flat piece of glass, the same way as I'm talking to you today. Why am I still working in 2 dimensions when I can disappear into 3? And when you get into 3 dimensions, your view on spatial relationships is just totally and utterly different to what it is that you can achieve from a screen. Now, I'm going to be one of the few people that says that COVID played exactly into my game back in April last year, because we were just going through the point of launching molecular modeling and protein sciences within VR, massive data exploration, again, within virtual reality. And virtual reality, working in that space obviously gives you the opportunity to work remotely. So we all disappeared out of the lab and went home. And guess what? We brought the kit with us. So we continued. COVID didn't stop us doing structural biology, doing protein sciences, designing molecules that could be drugs of the future. And if I say there's one thing that's had a massive impact and it's actually been helped by COVID, it is this virtual presence that you can achieve and the ability to continue to innovate through augmented reality and virtual reality.
It's fascinating. I actually had my my first ever business meeting last week in the metaverse with a heads-up device on, and it was a fascinating experience. And I can only imagine of the transformative potential that it has in healthcare. Hakim, maybe would you like to go next on the question?
Yeah, I'm going to copy something that Steve Bates, the head of the Bioindustry Association, said in the middle of the COVID pandemic, and of all people, he quoted Lenin and said that there are decades when nothing happens and there are weeks when decades happen. And that's certainly what it felt like for technology adoption during 2020 and now in 2021. We've had a phenomenal uptake in the use of digitization of health services. And it feels like there has been a mass education of clinicians in the ability to use digital technologies to consult patients where it's appropriate, a mass education of the populace in understanding the valuable nature of monitoring remotely a condition, and then when something happens like an infection, intervening. And so I think there's this opportunity now through remote monitoring, whether it be wearables, whether it be other forms of digitized healthcare services that have been driven by COVID, but also not just by the adoption of the technology, the education of the workforce, the patients, the carers, in that this can work. There will always be situations where you need a face-to-face consultation and you cannot do it virtually. There will always need that human touch in medicine. But what we've learned is that we can use this technology to rapidly improve care, but also now that people understand how it can work for them. And that's something that I don't think anything like a pandemic could have done. And so there have been some silver linings in the last year.
Incredible. Ken, I think you were going to follow on from that.
Well, yeah, I was going to jump in because, as I say, my spectrum is quite broad, but I have a couple of ideas about where technology has really impacted businesses with which I'm associated. I mean, in fact, the technology has really helped create the businesses. David was talking about the new technologies. I would broaden it a little bit and just talk about drug discovery technologies generally. But yes, we had the genomics, and many years ago, I remember working in areas like pharmacogenomics, looking at alterations in the structure of our clinical trial processes. But we haven't really done an awful lot. We can do lots of mapping, but actually generating new therapeutics out of that knowledge has been quite limited. So what we're looking at now is the next generation or the next levels of the sciences in drug discovery, transcriptomics that David mentioned, metabolomics, proteomics, polyomics, multiomics. There's a generation for it. And I have an association with one company which is basically does unbiased quantitative proteomics. And they can generate 10,000 data points, more than 10,000 data points from a single cell. The vastness of the data that they generate from running samples through their mass spec machines is just mind-blowing. So I think one of the big technologies that is coming through is, first of all, the familiarity with the intracellular details, whether that be metabolites or the proteins and the protein fragments, but also the technology to actually take that data, structure and curate that data and analyze it to understand much better what are the differences, what's the delta in a protein in a healthy cell versus something that is diseased. And I think that is, for me, really quite astonishing, the acceleration of that those technologies in the drug discovery space. When I looked at it first, I thought, well, these still seem a bit nice to have. But I think increasingly they're must-haves in the drug discovery race. And the other one, which is a bit more practical, I think, when I worked in the pharmaceutical industry and in the clinical development and the interface between clinical and commercial, it was always there was always an abrasion. I think what we have now with the development of technologies that in the clinic more effectively engage with the patients who are enrolled in the studies, the quantum more of data that we can get from those patients and the ease with which we can get it. But it also helps us take a step much more towards getting the real world evidence from these new therapeutics when they go past their NDA submission and approval and marketing license. I think that is the applications that we now have, the opportunity to get software into various devices that people can use as a supporting mechanism when they're away from that clinical setting, I think is just huge in terms of the learning that we'll have and how we can then learn that and take that into the next generation product development.
Amazing. And I just learned a new term. I've never heard quantitative proteomics before, Ken. That is a buzz phrase that I will keep noted and use in future. But yeah, we've covered over a really interesting cross section there. If I can come to you, Alison, to hear your viewpoint.
Yes, I think the biggest change I've seen is similar to that Hakeem's just described, and that is the much wider adoption of telehealth. So we've been told for decades in clinical trials that we must go to monitor at site. Patients must go to the clinic to get their drug and to have their bloods drawn, and we must follow them up, and we mustn't do anything outside of that clinic. But of course, COVID-19 happened and everything turned on its head. And now we know we can treat patients in the home, we can take the blood there, we can get drug directly from the distribution centre directly to the patient's house. So for me, there's been a fundamental shift in the way that we do things that is more cost effective, more efficient. I'm not saying that a patient never has to set foot in a clinic again. That, of course, is not correct. But I think it has challenged the pharmaceutical industry to think more laterally and to not accept the status quo that they have done just because this is how we've been doing clinical trials for 40 years. Doesn't mean to say that that's what we have to do moving forward. And of course, that's brought conversations about, well, how can we gather data more accurately with patients, whether it's a little app instead of a diary that's time and date stamped. So we know that they're actually doing it at the right time and not on the boot of the car before they walk into the hospital, which is what traditionally happens. So I think there's been a lot of opening up of these ideas to a very conservative traditional industry.
Amazing.
Can I just pick up on something Alison said? Sorry, Ken.
Of course.
So before Closed Loop Medicine, I sat on the board of a company trying to establish a real-world decentralized clinical trial model. And effectively, we were banging our head against a brick wall for most of the time because no one could see the value of that. What, to Alison's point, we've suddenly seen the utilization of a decentralized clinical trial model. And during COVID, we were able to leverage that. So we were about to run a clinical trial in the UK, and it just got approval before COVID struck, and all non-COVID related research was paused within the NHS. And the study that we were working on was for a precision medicine approach to better management of high blood pressure. And we realized there were some links between high blood pressure and COVID, redesigned the app so it could monitor blood pressure, but also look at COVID-19. And we were able to find a relatively small company in the US called Curebase, who set up a decentralized clinical trial model. And during COVID, we set up a clinical study, had 400 patients in the US collecting data. We've had 6 months worth of data, and we're now analyzing it. And that went from sort of concept to trial launch within a couple of months. Something that you would never have done before. And now we're sitting here with a really valuable data set that's going to support our development, but that would only happen through that new decentralized clinical trial model that Alison's speaking to. So I do think this one might be one of the ones where the genie's got out the bottle, particularly if you look at the financings going in to companies like Medable and others in the US at the moment. Hopefully this model's here to stay.
Yeah,
it's interesting that, sorry, Ken.
It's also because, I don't know if it's really caused an explosion in the companies that are focusing on decentralized or virtual or hybrid clinical trials, but they're getting a lot of new business and they're growing very rapidly. What's the one? Is it Matrix over in Chicago was one I was talking to, and Medical Research Network over here. You know, they're really focusing on this decentralized model. That's what they do, putting nurses into the domestic circumstances of the patients who are enrolled. I heard in a conversation with a US consultancy of taking it to another level, though, that one of our big pharmaceutical companies seems to have shied away from the ideas of clinics altogether in this COVID time, and stocked and staffed a jet and flies around the continental North America to engage with their clients, their patients and their clinical studies. So it's increasingly, I think, not the patients having to commit to make that journey to the clinic on a weekly or fortnightly or monthly basis, but actually the clinic will now come to them. It's fascinating.
And I suppose it plays into the ubiquity of devices. You know, not only are we smartphone habituated, you know, within the adult population, so we have these sensor-rich devices on our bodies 24/7, 365, but we also have wearable devices, activity trackers, and the like. Speaking to that, the space of digital therapeutics is an area of great interest as a category in terms of using software programs and digital devices to prevent, manage, treat diseases or disorders. If I was to ask you if you feel that digital therapeutics as a form and format is here to stay, and could you give us any examples which you think are, you know, kind of exceptional that are out there in the field of digital therapeutics at this time?
That's one for you.
We haven't heard from David.
Yeah.
Maybe you want to throw
but happy to kick off, and I'm sure input with from David. I guess I think what's been really interesting over the last few years is this move away from traditional digital health to more of a greater understanding of the different segments within digital health. I mean, my personal pet hate is the phrase digital health. What on earth does that mean in 21st century medicine? It's just healthcare done properly. And so you're starting to now understand the different segments, so digital therapeutics, decision support, AI. And when it comes to digital therapeutics, we've seen now the first FDA regulated DTX, Reseto from Pear Therapeutics. And we're now starting to see the development of these tools and technologies and are being applied to other diseases and other conditions. I think the challenge, because we're right at the early stages of wide-scale use of these types of technologies, is understanding where they add the most value to patients in the health system. You know, as a phrase that an old colleague of mine, and actually Ken and David's used to use, which is to a baby with a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And that's the danger with the digital therapy space, is that we've really got to understand the utilization and value for the patient, for the physician, for the payer, and for the providers as well. What we're starting to see, I think, is some very early and obvious areas around pain management. So looking at likes of Kaya coming out of Germany, and the digitized clinics that Sword and Hinge Health are providing in the US. We're starting to see areas in neuroscience, particularly schizophrenia, with companies like Otsuka. But the interesting thing is, where do you go next? Where are the next high value opportunities for digital therapy? So I think they probably are here to stay, but not necessarily ubiquitous amongst healthcare, but in the areas where they add value.
And I think, Hakeem, what you've just said is very relevant in that, you know, therapeutics is probably the word that confuses people. You know, your smartphone does not cure you. It's a disease management system, first and foremost. I would suggest, you know, if you're looking at biomarkers or collecting data on outcomes or what the patient's status is, so that a doctor can intervene more quickly, earlier, with the correct pharmacological you know, therapy or any other therapy for that matter. So, you know, the therapeutic benefit comes in the knowledge and the information rather than in the device or the digital tech itself, if that makes sense.
I think it does, but there is additional benefits, I think, Alison. I mean, to Hakeem's point, I think what we've focused on thus far are the more obvious targets, the sort of mental health, the help with the feelings of well-being, that sort of supportive model of therapeutic.
Cool.
My interest is, where do we go, to your point, Hakim? Where are the more difficult areas that we could be attacking with this? If to date, the traditional model of therapies hasn't worked, what can we do that really does take us to another level of improved outcomes using software as a component of that treatment regime?
It's difficult, I suppose, in some respects, because people tend to think technology first, don't they? They tend to think about a specific technology and then try to shoehorn it in. And to Hakim's point, you have to think value first, and whether that's patient value, whether that's process value, whether that's business value, and then design the solution and integrate the technologies that need to be integrated, rather than thinking technology first.
So I'm really at risk here of being that baby with a hammer, because I'm a technology developer. So I look at the tech and go, shiny, let's go and have a play with that. But let's build on some of Hakim's ideas, and also on what Alison was saying, which I think is really that we're discussing here, digitally augmented therapeutics. And therefore we're collecting data. And to me, the value of that data is as relevant to how we treat the patient today as it is to how we understand population level health of the future. So if we can collect that, my digital smartwatch, it collects my sleep pattern, my heart rate, my stress levels. Quite good at the moment. But it does all of that, and it stores it. It sends it to my phone. My phone puts it in the cloud, and it sits there, and nobody does anything with it, apart from at the weekend I look and go, oh, I didn't sleep very well on Wednesday night. That data is priceless when we put it together at a population level. The insights we can get using machine learning, or dare I use the term AI, from that 50 million people, 60 million people in the UK who could have that capability, is absolutely astounding when we think about the longitudinal value of that data. Yeah. So it isn't just, to me, it isn't just about today, it's about how we get insights and we unlock knowledge about disease that we can use in the drive towards new therapeutics of the future.
Yeah, and I think based on what you said, David, there are some more obvious things that are probably being done already, although I'm not aware of them, but just things like physician contact can dramatically, increase a placebo response in a clinical trial, or the fact that you're monitoring yourself, it's called the Hawthorne effect. The fact that you're measuring it means you change your behavior. So I can see how digital health, these constant reminders or a little check-in from your local nurse, whatever it happens to be, through the technology could augment, as you say, augment the response to treatment, any treatment.
I think we go even further than that. And if we have the baseline of our health, and we start to see over a period of years that with this variance in that baseline, then perhaps we can start to hint that we should go and get a checkup with the physician before we start to be symptomatic, before you really start to suffer from a disease. Earlier intervention, that proactive intervention in the care pathway, always leads to better outcomes. And it strikes me as amazing, with all this technology and capability we have around us, this is still something that I think has a way to go to be realized as a societal value.
Yeah. It's a fascinating point.
Sorry, but just pick up on the point that David made around the longitudinal nature of the data set and the value it then has. And I think that is a key point. Healthcare and wellness and individual patient outcomes are knotty problems. They're not going to be solved by one intervention alone. They require, to the point you started with, Blair, the 4 Ds, whether it be drug, data, device, diagnostic, digital, probably make it 5 Ds, and probably even stretch it further if we really wanted to. And that needs to come together. That needs to be a curated, longitudinal, integrated data set where we can start to then amass that at a population health level. The problem is at the moment is that the digital health companies have the PROM data. The medtech companies have data if they have got a smart enabled medical device on that particular outcome measure. And pharma have the data they have, and IQVIA and IMS have the rest. Now, the challenge here is, how do you start bringing that together? Because if you can start to curate high quality data sets that bring those different Ds, those different modalities together, you create not only a way to individually manage someone and provide precision care, but a way to do population health management, which is where health systems like the NHS and across the world need to be able to get to, particularly when you see the challenges that COVID-19 have exposed on the level of health inequality we have. one of the biggest drivers for the outcomes for COVID is health inequality. And that is about population health management.
It's interesting because there are some examples of that happening already, isn't there, Hakim? We both know Flatiron, which is big in the States and trying to make an impact now in the UK and elsewhere. And that is exactly what they're trying to do. I think, they have the electronic medical record data. They contract with hospitals or trusts and groups of hospitals in the state, and they bring in, it's all oncology. So they're just bringing in all the cancer-related data, both the structured out of the electronic medical records. Big challenge, of course, and the heavyweight resources taking all the unstructured data and structuring it and putting it back so you've got that longitudinal picture. And they curate it and they use it, promote it back to the industries that are providing some of the data and to the hospitals and the trusts that are also contracting to provide the data. So these things are happening. But my concern is that there's still going to be, I think, significant gaps because the background data systems that we have are still not quite comprehensive yet. I feel sometimes as if we're trying to build high towers when the foundations aren't too stable. That may be a rather jaundiced view, but I do hope that we are paying heed to the substance of what we're actually building upon.
I think it's something that you see kind of, across industry, and it's something that I suppose that is a concern in a range of different businesses and industries right now, is that you kind of have these discrete siloed data sets that exist, only in certain bits of certain businesses and aren't shared across, a group or an industry, or potentially aren't shared across, like a wide enough cohort of stakeholders to sort of drive the right kind of value from those sort of integrated data sets. Speaking specifically about how kind of software and the digital devices that we're habituated to as patients and people that are on a wellness journey throughout our lives, Oracle obviously build software interfaces, UX and UIs, some of our kind of bread and butter, and we've seen a range of kind of game orientated kind of techniques and the gamification of devices coming into the healthcare space. And I was wondering if you guys have any examples where gamification of digital platforms have offered novel data points or created interesting opportunities to accrue data that maybe wouldn't have been accrued in a previous instantiation.
I've had experience kind of the other way around. And this was in the Duchenne muscular dystrophy space. So it's a severe neuromuscular wasting disease that affects little boys. Getting any little boy, let alone one with a difficult motor and muscle condition, to do anything is quite difficult in a clinical setting. So some very forward-thinking physiotherapists in the US adapted the Wii U, so you. And they were making that into, a tool to assess stabilization, decline, and response to therapy, to see, whether they could retain certain skills over time with their muscle deterioration. The thing in my space, which is the pre-registration space, is that we must validate these outcome measures because we must be able to say, this quantification equals this much benefit is clinically relevant to the patient because, and that's probably the bit that is always going to be a challenge, whatever we do. But I think as an industry, we should look at this in, much more detail, not just for children, but for elderly. I mean, elderly people like crosswords and other things as well. Why wouldn't they like a game? So, to record the score of their clinical status. Sorry.
And the idea there is that you have to quantify and be able to validate the data inputs that are occurring and how that is not only being measured, how it's being audited, but also what decisions are being made off the back of that data. Is that correct?
Exactly right. Yes. What does it mean? It's kind of, we always have to answer the so what question when it comes to regulators and reimbursement agencies. Okay, somebody has walked 10 meters more or 30 meters more, so what?
So Alison, can I come in there, because I'd like to build on your point, and it's something that I'm really confused about. So I'm going to come back to my tech dev toy box, and I'm going to talk about virtual reality and augmented reality again, and its use in the management of things like seasonal adjustive disorder, when we can change our view on a wet, dreary Wednesday afternoon to make it look like you're sat in your living room with sunshine coming through the window. Or we can look at the use of these things for people who are recovering from stroke or traumatic brain injury for physiotherapy purposes to be able to assist them. So obviously here we're not talking about our white powder in the bottle and measuring the effect of that, but we're doing something that encourages and engages that patient cohort to either feel better or to be able to exercise more. And for those sorts of things, it's difficult to think about the reimbursement side. And indeed, there's an example of virtual reality being used for seasonal adjustive disorder therapy where it hasn't been successful because of the regulatory hurdles. And to me, that just seems like it's absolutely bonkers.
It's fascinating. I suppose it plays back into the point that Alison made about the Hawthorne effect, that because you have been challenged by the device and by the action, that then you see a benefit because it's engaging you in a way that you potentially wouldn't have been engaged if there hadn't been some intervention at that point. And to your point, it's like a cart before horse kind of situation, that if you don't go with these types of technologies and give these kind of gamified experiences to people, you might not get the benefit that you would have had in another instance.
Yeah, it's about more effective engagement, isn't it? It's about just making it more attractive for the patient to give you the data that you want them to do, and for them to get the benefit of sharing their condition. I think there's probably quite a lot of examples. I don't have any direct, but I know that the whole field of biomarkers is very much about translating the tools of diagnosis that we used maybe 10 years ago, maybe more, into tools, electronic tools that one can, I suppose it's what we call digital transformation, taking things from on the paper or hardware, picking, placing, those sort of things that can be translated into a device and to enhance the sort of results you get from the patient being more engaged, more animated with it, and also I think importantly being able to do it in a more private and confidential space. I think it might be helpful in that way.
I can see it might have a place in some of the major issues of our time, things like dementia and Alzheimer's, and measuring cognition, for example, tracking cognition through gamification, or ability to interact or understand what's going on a digital platform, as opposed to who is Prime Minister today. I think they might be more sensitive, for example. They might be more subtle because you've also got the motor skills as well as the cognitive ones. I could see definitely a space for digital therapeutics there, especially for monitoring that decline. Sorry, Hakeem, go on.
No, sorry, just building on what you said. I think the challenge we have, I come back to the thing you just said, Alison, which is the so what. We need to understand how to measure that and make sure we measure the right thing. So I think what digital loosely is enabling us is, for the first time really, to start to be able to measure the things that actually are meaningful for patients. And that's a really important part of this journey, because historically we've had features like your example, the 6-minute walk test. Does that have a meaningful value to patients, or actually are there other measures? I remember talking to David years ago about some work you were doing in the neurodegenerative space, and I think it was particularly Parkinson's, if I remember correctly. And the patient group you were talking to said, look, you're not going to cure my Parkinson's, but can you do something about my gut and my sleep? And actually starting to use quantifiable measures that would have value to patients, whilst at the same time having a very progressive and open dialogue with the regulators and understanding this is actually what has value to patients. And so you need to be doing both at the same time. And I think we're in this really interesting space where we are now able to start to measure, collect quantifiably, and to your point, make sure that the data is entered at the right point in time, not filled out in the doctor's waiting office. And so we're on that journey, but it has to come back to the so what, and it has to be for the so what for the patient.
And the other thing I like, or it has the potential to collect data across multiple domains. I mean, you know, the current wisdom is that there must be one primary outcome measure, and unless the patient meets that threshold on that day at that time, you know, the drug doesn't work. And we know that drugs have benefit over and above a single unidimensional kind of construct. And with the gathering of, let's call it big data or data across multiple domains, I think we will see much better and bigger patterns that are elusive at the moment, because even with the secondaries, there might only be 5 or 6 of them, and no 2 patients are the same. And that's one of the challenges I face quite often with heterogeneous populations, difficult data sets. Bringing it all together and making sense of it is a challenge. Sure.
And does that I suppose align with a broader theme here, which is maybe in the more sort of holistic review of data and its impact on certain conditions? I mean, you know, like you were saying, that there's very specific tests and very specific data that you would evaluate in the analysis of certain conditions, but does that sort of lend itself almost to the processing of more sort of I don't know, secondary metrics per se, that could paint a clearer picture of general health and wellness rather than condition specific?
I think that there's another dimension to it as well, Blair, if I may. I think listening to the conversation, what I was thinking about was a phrase that I heard, and that the fact of what we're doing, what the technology, the new technologies is enabling, is that we're able now to transition the patients from care, which is, as it were, based on a point in time, to more continuous. We can observe, we can monitor their condition, the peaks and troughs through the day, and it allows us to be much more comprehensive in our view of how they are performing in whatever treatment regime has been implemented, and more holistic in terms of the other things that are going on around them. What being better, more mobile, if we can manage the rheumatology more easily. What they can do, what it is they want to do that is perhaps self-reinforcing in terms of the improvement in the condition that they have.
I love that.
It's a much more coloured picture about patients and how we're able to improve their status, the outcomes generally, and give them a much better quality of life. And I think that the other thing which I was wondering about was the industry, and obviously they're the big spenders in this, aren't they? They're the ones who are going to commit funds to the expansion of digital technology and the information, the data that it can provide. And I think what I keep coming back to is that for the industry, I think this is still very much about the data. It's the quality of the data, the diversity of data, the structured nature of the data, how more readily they can access it and analyze it. I remember, and it just gives my age away, decades ago, when I was writing research on the industry, we started seeing some pretty large investments in some verticals on the pharmaceutical supply chain. Remember Merck buying pharmacy benefit management. We thought, what on earth are they doing that for? And it was just about trying to control the patient experience, trying to get the data, understand better so that they could plan their own development programs with great deal more confidence and accuracy. And I think we're still there, but we're seeing it now manifest in a different way. They don't want to go out and spend billions of dollars at that time. That was the 80s or early 90s. They were buying these businesses to help hopefully get visibility on the prescribing of medicines in the United States and the distribution through Medicare, Medicaid in particular. And it didn't work. A few followed, and then it fell into abeyance. But now we see investments being made by companies like Pfizer, Merck, Roche, in things that don't obviously improve their bottom line, except it gives them quality of data and engages them much more effectively with the patient population that they're trying to serve.
So that's fascinating, and actually probably brings me on to my next point, Ken, which maybe you'll be able to comment on. So, you know, if we're talking about data, and we all know how, you know, a sort of high on the regulators list of kind of tasks is ensuring that data is of the highest quality, is collected in the right way, is stored in the right way, especially when it comes to personally identifiable information, especially about people's healthcare. What innovations need to occur or are occurring in regulation in this year, and need to occur for some of the stuff that you guys have talked about to you know, come to fruition?
Well, I know Hakim has a great deal more knowledge of this than I, but we are starting to see frameworks or processes in place to evaluate the software element of any combination or SAMD standards. There is a formulary in North America which has got a program of assessment similar across Europe, but I think Hakim is living this much more closely than I, so I'm very happy to defer to him.
We'll throw over to Hakim then.
So I think it's a really interesting space, and one that represents a challenge for many digital health companies and DTX companies who haven't necessarily worked in a regulated environment, and it really does distinguish those who are going, you know, hell-bent at life sciences and healthcare, and those who are sticking more to the wellness side. And there's a strong argument for being either side of the regulatory hurdle. For those companies that do want to build a moat and build that defense and build the quality standards and work to them for regulatory, I think what we're seeing is some very progressive moves by the regulators in terms of understanding the needs of new technologies coming through for assessment. And speaking more just to the digital therapeutic space, we've seen in the US the pre-cert program established by the FDA to look at, you know, 7 or so pioneering companies developing next generation digital therapies, where they recognize the need to be thinking about regulating the company rather than the product, given the level of innovation happening at the product. We've now got in Germany the DIGA, the new reimbursement act for digital health technologies, and hearing that other countries across Europe are going to be following suit pretty quickly. And so that not only means there's a reimbursement, a regulatory, but then also a reimbursement route as well. I think the challenge that we're all dealing with is, first of all, to have the right capital and finance to be able to develop a regulated product, because actually working to those standards costs money, and small digital health startups have to have quite a significant depth of capital to be able to cross that barrier, and so that requires a different breed of investors as well, which we are seeing. They're absolutely emerging in this space. Then the second thing is we need to have that level of innovation and understanding from a regulatory perspective, because the value of what we're doing from a digital engagement is learning through data, what works, what doesn't work. So if you do learn something and you want to make a modification, do you go back and re-regulate the whole product? You would hope not. But actually, how are we going to deal with these complexities as we start to develop? And what we're seeing is a level of recognition coming from the regulators. So we've been working with the MHRA, EMA, and FDA, and certainly they haven't been putting any barriers up. If anything, they want to sit down and have an open dialogue on how they can support the regulation of sort of next generation technologies, which is really great coming when you're sat there as a small and medium sized company talking to the regulator and having that level of support.
Amazing. Is there anything, David or Alison, that you'd like to add? I'm aware that we're, you know, coming close to having 10 minutes or so to cover off some questions. Would you like to cover off anything else in the regulatory space, David or Alison?
I'm good. I'm kind of eager to get onto that last question.
I just had one point to make, just building on Hakim's, and
of course,
a conversation I had with a group in the UK, but their focus is very much on the health, economics and outcomes research, and they are increasingly relying on the application of models. I get the impression they are now primed to expect a much richer set of data on which they can base their evaluations of the fourth hurdle. And I think that will also be a catalyst for further development of the applications to be able to get that diversity of data that quality of life assessment could be accelerated and enabled by the application of these technologies.
Amazing. So we've got a large swathe of questions. There's probably two that stand out to me, so I'll ask this one first. More and more, we're seeing tech companies try to become health companies and health companies trying to become tech companies. Do you think that this is a consistent pattern that we're going to see going forward, and what are the challenges of this paradigm?
Investment.
David, do you have an opinion on that? Was that the question that you were referring to?
I first heard a very well-known pharma leader called George Post. I think it was back in 1989. I had just started work. He was a big and powerful gentleman, and scary to boot. And he stood on stage at Wembley Arena and told the whole of what was then SmithKline Beecham, or SmithKline in French. The future doesn't lie in white powders and bottles, guys. You've got to do something else to just stay there as a provider of the primary health solutions. 30-something years has gone by. I'm not seeing it happening, not consistently. And I don't really understand why, because perhaps back then you could say that there were other barriers, there were technology barriers. Those barriers don't exist with cloud computing, with the deep learning and AI, so the collection of data passively from our watches, from our smart glasses, from our wearable devices, to get that baseline data. The big barrier is the unification of the data sets. And we even have this at the tissue data level and the genomics level, and the need to introduce things like OMOP so that these data sets can talk to each other. We've actually got to go through this pain. And on the other side, there's a bag load of data that's going to, and insight that we can use to help patients. Sorry, Alison.
No, I was going to say we shouldn't underestimate the cost of the technology itself. I mean, who's going to pay for these smartwatches? Because the majority of the population.
Well, I'll give you an example. We did an experiment when we didn't have smartwatches until Christmas, and we thought we'd do an experiment to find out what the value of them was. So I got onto Amazon and I bought my wife a smartwatch for £16.
Yeah, so if that can be, adapted for the correct capabilities, that maybe is affordable within the NHS. But I think we've got one question from an audience participant, is asking about, are these advancements just going to create, are they going to be biased towards higher income demographics? And I think it's a really pertinent question. If I think of my own father, who's nearly 80, he doesn't have a smartphone because he can't operate one because his fingers are too big. And he just, he's tried several times and failed. So, we make a lot of assumptions about accessibility to the technology that maybe aren't there.
Sorry, Alison. Can I come back? So my one-word answer probably needs a bit of explanation, but I just in passing, I do hope you're a bit more generous with your Christmas presents for your wife. I said investment because I have recent and personal pain in talking to various investors, and they like you to either be technology or life sciences or healthcare. The idea of it coming together as some sort of hybrid is, in my experience, and it may not be the same for everyone, is quite complicated for the investment community. And it's mainly because they know what to look for in a life sciences company, and they know what to look for in a tech company. When you present as a combination of the two, they get mightily confused and start trying to rationalize the mix of criteria for investment, and they just, no, this is too complicated. So I think getting the real clarity of the proposition for those combinations of technology and life sciences or healthcare is absolutely crucial. I think companies are doing it because I did have a scan across a number of what I think originated as technology companies, but have rapidly looked to graft on life sciences and healthcare capabilities, bringing on board physicians or clinicians or clinical experience to enhance the proposition that they are putting forward. And I think that's my last observation. I'll give way. I have also observed that there does seem to be a really accelerating number of products that are in the marketplace to support what we've been talking about, digital healthcare or healthcare better, as Hakim puts it, by enablement with technology. And I think those are increasingly being informed by the right sort of experience, the right sort of medical healthcare experience.
So to link the question then about investment with the question that Alison alluded to around the kind of discrepancies between public and private healthcare, is it incumbent upon government agencies to kind of de-risk that early capital flow into what looks like really innovative programs of work and new companies? If there is a difficulty in convincing, private equity to flow into the space.
I think that's a very
yeah.
Yeah.
I think we're already starting to see it from agencies like Innovate UK, NHSX, and others here in the UK are starting to prime the system with non-dilutive funding, which helps. But I still think, to Ken's point, the investment criteria and risk appetite and the way risk is structured in a life sciences company, a tech company, are fundamentally different. That is a challenge. What we are seeing, though, is that there is a convergence of investors coming to this middle ground of life sciences, healthcare, and technology, more so from tech investment and healthcare investment than life sciences, I must say. They're the ones that are moving rapidly to that center ground. Because they can see the value and starting to really understand the importance of why you would go to the FDA, for example, which is something they wouldn't have necessarily had a company go through their portfolio. So there are a number of companies now, a number of investors who are specifically calling out the fact that they are investing at the convergence of life sciences and IT and software. To your point, Alison, I think it's a really important one, and we have to make sure that these products are universally accessible, or design them knowing that they're not. But you have to take one or the other approach. What I hope, certainly my vision here, is that what we are able to do by taking some of the actions that would normally be done by maybe accessing a high-end key opinion leader who's going to sit down with you and tailor your therapy to get it just right for you, that's something that can be digitized if you have the right data inputs and you have the right understanding. And to be able to put the perfect clinician, if there were such a thing, on the patient's shoulder and guide them through that journey, suddenly you're in a situation where what the US payers, who I'm talking to, refer to as underserved populations, are gaining access to some of the very best care. And so hopefully it becomes a way of creating greater equity in access to high quality care. But we do have to make sure that it's designed with those users in mind, to make sure that we're not designing for the wrong population.
Yes, and this links very strongly with the whole telehealth concept as well. Remote monitoring of patients, where something's uploaded on a daily basis, and the doctor's computer pops up a little alert when something's, a little bit out of range or something. You can see that happening in the future, although not there yet. And one of the questions we have from the audience, is telehealth here to stay? Or will we go back to our old ways? And I think it's a bit like this whole COVID crisis. Will we keep the traffic off the road or not? Sadly, I suspect not. And it's very disappointing that when I take the dog for the walk, I can no longer hear the bird song that I could 6 months ago, because the traffic's going down the A30. But I think it's up to us as an industry to make it happen, to say, okay, this worked during COVID, why can't we do it again? Why can't we replicate it? So I think it's incumbent upon us to force through these changes.
100%. And I think that is a really, really great place to kind of bring our discussion to an end, where we've got 2 minutes until we hit the 3 o'clock mark. And so I would just like to start off by thanking each of our panelists. Incredibly insightful input. And like I said, an education for me, and I'm sure for a range of people that joined the call. If you want to have a recording of this to share with anyone that you know, or if you'd like to ask further questions of ourselves at Warrical or any of the panelists here, please do get in touch with Heather, who organised the event. And we'd just like to say thank you so much for joining us today. And we hope to hear from some of you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.